All right, so let me share my screen real quick. All right, so let me make sure I got everything here.
But we cannot hear you. But I'll ask you.
All right, so I tested it out again, Nelu. I tested it out. It didn't work out. I'm gonna just leave it as it is. All right, well, appreciate it. I really do appreciate it. I'm excited. I'm excited because definitely this is kind of like my first sort of presentation outside of the organization. So really am excited about this. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background about myself. I've been working around Agile for the last, I would say maybe around 10 years, right? That's kind of been my start of the journey. Never really kind of took legs until later on, right? So I kind of started my background, before I had to reinvent myself by coincidence. My background is really from project management, right? So start off in project management. I did that for quite a bit of time until I would say maybe about 5 years ago, right? And give or take, maybe a little bit more. That's where I really started taking my experience into, becoming a Scrum Master thereafter. I felt like I found my passion. That was definitely my good day. In the organization I'm in, they were going through a transformation for the past, I don't know, maybe so far right now, maybe around 5 years or so, right? So I was part of that journey. I was really part of that journey itself. And it's great to be part of an organization that really supports Agile top down and even bottoms up. You really get exposed to a lot of experiences, a lot of real cool people along the way. But most importantly is that I was able to work in an environment that really inspires me, which is fantastic. Thereafter, I basically decided that I wanted to take the coaching route. And for the past few years, I've been doing that and really enjoying every moment of it. So I worked in various industries. Telecom is really the main one that I've been working for, several years. But just to tell you a little bit about my personal story, well, I do have a family. You probably see my dog back there. That's Archie. Oh, he doesn't sleep all day, aside from following me around. But I am one that really I like to really kind of submerge myself in experience, culture. I'm a real people-oriented person, and even aside from that, I would say, or maybe a lot of people would say that I have this creative bug inside my head, right? I tend to really bring that creativity into everything that I do, and I don't know what it is. I used to draw when I was a little kid, and I'm a little bit more creative than maybe most. I don't consider myself an artist, so I'm kind of like in that middle ground where I'm really implementing my creativity to my day to day, right? And I think that's really my signature when it came to becoming a Scrum Master, and then later on to becoming a coach. Right? So aside from that, I'm really happy to be here. I really want to give back to the community. That's really my intent of coming here and presenting, getting out there, getting some exposure. But also, prepping up for the Agile International Conference that's coming up, this upcoming year. Hopefully, you guys are able to make it. It's a really fun event. I volunteered last year, and I had fun the whole time. It was a great experience for me. All right, so today I'm going to talk to you about my TDD implementation story. Okay. All right, so just to kind of give you, just kind of like what my intent is here for today, right? I do want to share my experience. At the same time, I'm not sure, who's out there, who's in the audience, but if you guys have had some sort of experience or would like to share any feedback, I'm really open to it, right? For me, I'm going to tell you the story based on, how I was able to handle the sort of scenario that I was in. But with that, I'm going to go and kind of start out the story with this particular scene itself, right? So I'm not sure if you guys seen Office Space, but I'm probably going to be referencing quite a bit of movies throughout the way. So hopefully by the time we finish today or tonight, you're going to want to go and maybe watch some of the movies that you see here, or even other movies that you may be interested in. So, all right, so let's start out with the beginning of the story, right? So like I mentioned, I kind of jumped into the journey of being a coach. And, just I think in the beginning it was really I wanted to really start, getting involved in many of the things that really makes strong coaches, right? I wanted to be part of the transformation. And like I mentioned before, luckily I'm part of an organization that's been going through a transformation, and I think they really create that environment that allows you to really explore different avenues and different ideas and things of that nature. So here I am, sitting as a coach, and then I get sort of approached by a leader, and kind of looks like this guy from Office Space, right? Where he comes to me and he goes, we have this quality first sort of priority, and if you could shift left, that would be great. So when he came to me, I'm like, what the hell is, shift left? What does that mean? Is it, what exactly is that, right? So I probably had this stupid face or stupid look in my face, kind of like this guy over here, right? Or maybe like this guy, because he's got the beard now, right? Basically, at this moment, I was kind of in a situation where, all right, here in the organization, we have around 52 agile teams by this point. We're not thinking about launching any other team. I really want to get exposed and start working on stuff that really is really going to shift the needle. So here comes leadership and say, all right, we want to shift left. We want to work on TDD. All right, well, first thing I think about, and probably what most of you guys are probably thinking about, is like, what's TDD? How do you eat it? But lettuce, tomato, pickles, I have no idea what TDD was at that point. All right, so what I want to do is I want to kind of explain a little bit on what that situation kind of looked like for me. So this guy comes to me, telling me around this new thing that he wants to do. And basically, here are the sort of, I guess, limits that we have to kind of work within, right? So this is to be considered a part of the strategy. So it's going to be reported as part of the strategy. This leader wants to make sure that the entire IT organization heads towards this direction. All right. At the same time, we are kind of focused on being more of influencers, but we don't want to push this onto anybody, right? We really want to go ahead and kind of encourage people to really take this direction. And most importantly, let's not disrupt delivery. People are working. They really need to kind of deliver. We cannot go ahead and kind of pull them aside for a training or anything like that. And aside from that, we need to work within our capacity. That means that they're busy, they're fully, they're capped out on everything that they're working, and we got to make it as less interruptive as possible. All right. Oh yeah, and by the way, there's no cash or anything like that. Just kind of go with it, right? So obviously there's some limitations there on what it is that we can spend it or how we can spend it, but I basically went ahead and said, yeah, let's go for it, right? So before I continue my story, let me kind of take you a little bit and kind of explain what does that shift left testing strategy actually means, right? So it is a software testing approach that places a strong emphasis on conducting testing activities early in the development lifecycle. That's SDLC. This improves software quality and reduces time spent resolving issues later in the pipeline. All right. So basically what that says is that no matter if you're doing waterfall or if you're doing agile, we basically follow the same principles when it comes to software development. Those are like typical steps that you take when you're going through the process. So software development is a structured process that enables production of high quality, low cost software in shorter times, right? So when we talk about shift left, if you look, here's the SDLC, right? The software development lifecycle. And as you can see, that's kind of like where the step of testing comes into play. So the idea behind shifting left is that everything you see to the left of that little pink test box, coding, design, define, and plan, the idea is that we want to incorporate any testing strategies or elements before we get to that point, right? So what we're doing is that we're embedding testing within our software development lifecycle. And here are some of the benefits that are associated to that is that there are some competitive advantages if you kind of work in this fashion. Definitely, you consider that there's going to be some high quality work at the end of this. It's going to be more efficient, and ultimately,
Working on that.
Ultimately, since since you're reducing bugs, you're going to be reducing costs.
Please try this.
I got my Siri talking to me right now. Give me a second. All right, so who is this guy? And so what about TDD, right? So Ken Beck, for those of you who probably looking at this, probably recognize this guy, but this guy is one of the first crusaders. It's not Indiana Jones, but he's definitely one of the co-writers of the Agile Manifesto, right? But most importantly, he wrote this book. Oh, no, that book is the one from Hocus Pocus, so happy Halloween, y'all. But in all seriousness, he actually wrote this particular book itself, Extreme Programming Explained. And basically, he was the inventor of extreme programming back in 1996. So as you can see, this guy, Ken Beck, was a co-writer of the Agile Manifesto that was written in 2001. He went ahead and he had created these extreme programs. So if I read this, extreme programming is an agile software development framework that aims to produce higher quality software and higher quality of life for development team. XP is the most specific of the agile frameworks regarding appropriate engineering practices for software development. So what this tells me is that this guy is the Don Corleone of agile. This guy is the OG, right? His practices, what he created basically fed into what we know as agile today. Okay? So within the extreme programming practices, we have something called test-driven development. And test-driven development is a methodology in software development that focuses on an iterative development cycle where the emphasis is placed on writing test cases before the actual feature or function is written. And we'll go over a flow so that you can really kind of sync the information and appreciate it. All right. TDD utilizes repetition of short development cycles. It combines building and testing. All right. That's going to be important in a little bit. This process is not only helps ensure correctness of code, but also helps to indirectly involve the design and architecture of the project in hand. So it's intended to really create better code. All right, so this is what the test-driven development workflow really looks like, right? And the idea is that you first start with a fail-first approach. It's really around creating a test case initially, right? That's the idea behind the test-first development. So what you do is that you create a test case, and once you create that test case, what the developer does is that they write enough code to be able to pass that particular test case, right? So basically what they're doing is that they're writing the minimum to be able to go ahead and pass that particular test case. So it's actually the other way around. You're not developing and then testing the code. What you're doing is that you're actually creating the test case originally first, and then you go and you develop to really pass on that particular code itself. Now, once the developer goes and creates the code that passes that test case that he originally created, then he goes into refactoring. And refactoring basically is really around the cleaning of the code. And what they do is that they make sure that it's correctly written, that it's got the proper documentation, and it probably aligns to all the, basically all the initial, must-haves when it comes to code delivery, right? And then what they do is they start the cycle all over again. They go to the next test case and they code just enough to be able to pass that particular test case. Okay. Now, if you look at line items below, conventional, which is typical, which waterfall is that you go ahead and you develop, and after you develop, you go into the quality assurance. So it's something that I mentioned before, is the other way around, right? But what TDD does is that we really mash it all together. So as we are developing, we're actually testing at the same time. We're doing some quality assurance. So this happens quite a bit, and something that I started realizing when I really started going into this journey. Even so, when you have an agile team, you have a cross-functional team where you have developers, testers, all type of skill sets, and BA, everybody, right? But usually when the pressures are in and we have to go ahead and deliver, there's a tendency that a developer goes a lot faster in developing their code. And what happens most of the time is that they go ahead and, in this case, they're throwing it over the fence, right? But they do hand it off to a quality engineer, a tester, which they go ahead and they test. And, sometimes they come across some trivial type errors, some bugs, if you will. So what ends up happening is that the tester goes and kind of sends it back to the developer for them to correct that error. And I would say that sometimes, if not often, some of these errors are maybe some things that could be avoided, but because of the pressures and the time that they're doing to really kind of push their code ahead, they tend to go ahead and kind of throw it over the fence, right? Now, if we look at TDD, it's really around a mindset change, right? So here's an example itself where we got the developers, who were throwing before, they were throwing the code over the fence for the testers to go ahead and test. What TDD does is it really breaks that silo out and allows everybody to just work in a more unified way. All right, so what exactly, why, right? So TDD, driving development for tests to verify what it is that we want to create, right? So it really talks about intent first, which is really important, right? So it allows the developer and whoever's working within the team itself to really understand what the intent is first, right? Something that we actually do in Agile. As we write user stories, we talk about the intent. What is it that we want to develop? And ideally, TDD supports that case as well. It encourages us to take more of an iterative approach, which does support Agile, and because it is Agile, to design and develop as a result. And so we work in smaller, safer, better understood steps, working together as one unit. So going back to that image, this is where we go ahead and we destroy that particular wall, right? It promotes higher quality and promotes continuous delivery, right? So the idea behind Agile is that we want to be able to deliver continuously on value, right? And one of the main benefits, obviously, it's around getting it wrong, right? So that failed first attempt allows us to have a conversation around why it's failing and to be able to correct it. So even then, we talked about that it does help break silos. It does help teams write, better quality code. But why are organizations sort of seeking out in considering this shift left approach, right? So here's some empirical data that was pulled, right? Usenex, which is an organization out there, a nonprofit organization that does studies, they went ahead and they went across these multiple industries and they gathered around 200, close to 200 production failures from all various systems. And basically, when they looked and they analyzed it, they realized that around 58% of those errors were actually trivial in nature. And here's another one. This was based on an app. It's an online betting app. That the moment they went ahead and they adopted TDD, they actually reduced their production defects by more than 90%. So there's a lot of data out there, corporations, organizations that have adopted TDD in the past. Some stories, there's some failed stories, but there's actually a lot of good stories out there, right? That potentially companies want to tap into because it could reduce costs. It could create higher efficiency and higher quality and create a competitive advantage for most organizations. All right, so when I went into this, I started kind of researching a little bit, and I'm like, what the heck? There's a bunch of terms associated to TDD, right? So there's BDD, ATDD, there's Gherkin, automation, developers are testers, there's cucumbers, and I'm like, what the heck is going on, right? So to help you out, this is kind of like the best way to look at it, right? So this is the evolution of software development. Kind of reminds me of Encino Man. Anybody seen Encino Man? Just love that movie. So basically, if you look here at the far left, this is the basic little, little, I don't know, what is that, like a primate? You got the coding, right? And typically what was happening thereafter is that they would go ahead and they would try to clean the code that they went and developed. Then the introduction of unit tests came along, right? Thereafter, there was, the collection of multiple unit cases. And then when you start seeing more of the human walk here, more of the advanced sort of development practices, now you got TDD, ATDD, and BDD. Now, the difference between the evolution of TDD in these cases is really around the communication elements of it and how it generates more of a behavioral-driven development practice. And I'll kind of explain a little bit here in terms of the difference, right? Now, this is pretty wordy, but I'm going to read maybe the definition itself, and then I'm going to call out specific words here just to kind of nail it home, right? So TDD is a development technique that focuses more on the implementation of a feature, right? So we were kind of already talked about that, right? Now, ATDD is a technique similar to BDD, right? So basically what's telling me that ATDD and BDD are kind of like brother and sister or cousins or something really, really close, right? And BDD is a development technique that focuses on the system's behavior. Now, if you look, here's where you start kind of noticing the difference between TDD, ATDD, and BDD. It says when it talks about participants, now we're talking about the developer, customer, and QA. And what's happening here is that these folks are having a conversation. These are the guys that we call the three amigos, right? So you're probably going to hear that term quite a bit. But ideally what happens here is the difference between TDD and the rest of these two acronyms here is that there's a real conversation between the developer, the PO, and the tester. And they talk about the intent and the behavior that needs to happen or occur. Here's another difference you start seeing on the bottom, gherkin and cucumber. And that's something I'm going to talk about in a little bit, all right? So here's a nice little flow here just to kind of mention a little bit more around the difference, right? So we call this a TDD flow. But if you look closely, right below where it says TDD is called acceptance test-driven development. So this section here on the left of the dotted line is really the portion that we call ATDD, acceptance testing driven development, right? So when we talked about in the past, we talked about the conversation with the three amigos. And this is really the area where it happens. If you look at the flow on the left, there's a user story that's created within the Agile team. And there's a discussion around the team members, right? So we got everybody there having a conversation around what the intent of the user story is, what it distills. So there's a validation there on the actual, what's the need of the particular story itself. Then it goes into the development together and goes into the demo together, right? So the way to look at this is that everything to the left of the dotted line is something that the team does together, right? Now, if you look at the steps, when you go from top to bottom, you add the acceptance testing, right? Now, we talked about that the initial test case is the one that fails, right? So it continues down. So when it talks about making a little change, notice that it splits to the right and it goes into the developer TDD. And what that really calls out is that the developer now is using unit tests to do their test cases first. And then they go through the TDD model, right? Where they go, create the test case, they do enough code to pass that particular test case, and then they go through the refactoring of it, right? And then it goes back to the team again, right? So the idea behind that is that there's a team activity itself, and then the developer, when they're working on the code, they are taking the practice as well. So it's at a team level and is at the individual developer level as well, all right? Now, let's go back to where we talked about gherkin and cucumber and what makes the difference between BDD and ATDD. Now we're talking more around behavior-driven development, right? All right, so I'm going to read this out again. It is a software development approach that allows a tester to create simplified text language test cases, right? So if you look here on the bottom itself, this is kind of like the format that a test case would be written as. So it'd be like given. So this would be like the prerequisite, right? There would be a context to a scenario. When an event is triggered by another system or user action. And then there's an outcome that's also associated to this particular gherkin language, the way that they call it, right? Now, there are the benefits that are associated with the intent and communication associated to it, right? Now, where does Cucumber come into play? Cucumber is actually the application that supports this particular language, right? It's just a simplified text language when it comes to test cases. But if you look at it closely, it really does give the examples of what a true acceptance criteria should be written as. So when we're looking at BDD, at least from the organization that I'm in, we're looking at it from the perspective of the integration between whatever the work management tool is that we use to write user stories and making that leap into the actual creation of the test cases without having somebody physically write them. That's what BDD kind of evolves to. All right, so now that I explained all that, let me go back to my story, right? So we got this guy, hopefully you remember, he came to me and he's telling me, it's like, hey, we want TDD, right? He's got TDD on his mind. So now I got to put my thinking hat on. I'm like, okay, I don't want to say I've never done this before, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do my best. So first things first, I wanted to at least lay out everything that we were kind of seeking out, just to really understand what it is that we're kind of dealing with, right? So here's my strategy. I started kind of writing everything out. All right, vision. All right, we want to understand what the clear future is. We want to understand the goal. And why is that important? Because that really kind of states the why. Why is the organization doing this? What is the organization envisioning for the future itself? That's really an important item. Scalability. So it needs to be a well-formed program. This is a brand new program, guys, right? It doesn't exist today in the organization that I'm in, right? And what I started realizing soon enough was that there wasn't a lot of people within the organization that had experience doing TDD. So there wasn't really a playbook available. And that's something that the coaches are on the hook for. They needed to create a playbook because that needs to be available for anybody who needs to launch and take on the practice as well. And aside from that, we're only a few. We're small and mighty, and we support a huge organization. So there needs to be a self-serve consideration to this as well, so that it can be scalable. Credibility, finding the right team, right? So what's happening here is that you got a novice, somebody who's kind of jumping into this for the very first time. So we really need to kind of identify, like, how do we generate that credibility so that when we have these conversations with these highly technical teams, that we're coming from a place of credibility, right? So that to me was really, really important, that we really had to build a team that, at least from a perspective, from a team perspective, that we look at these guys as having, the expertise to come and teach TDD. Adaptability, which is really, really important. So kind of remember what I mentioned before, that, hey, we're there as influencers. That's the most important thing. Well, we need to create that self-realized value. It cannot be a top-down thing that, leadership is coming and telling everybody, hey, you need to do this. No. At the end of the day, we need to kind of be able to demonstrate the value so that they go ahead and realize it. And that's where true adoption really comes into play, right? And it cannot be perceived as added work, right? It has to be the right time, and it just needs to be in that right place for them to really have the opportunity to explore on this new technique, right? So it cannot be perceived as, hey, they're just throwing work at us, more work than we can handle at the moment. And it shouldn't be like a side project, right? It should be cooked up into what we already are working on. So it can't just be examples like, hey, just pretend that this is a user story that you're working on. In that case, it would just never be successful. We knew for a fact that, hey, we really needed to kind of grab the real life examples that we have at the organization and have those be the lessons that they use, the examples that they use to be able to go through the practice. And aside from that, the why, that to me was the most important thing, right? If we're there being as influencers, the why is the most critical piece itself, right? That and the realized value. But the why to me was like, why are we doing this? What does it mean to me if I go ahead and head towards this direction? If I need to shift my mindset, why do you feel that I need to change my mindset, right? Those are the things that I felt were really, really important, right? And aside from that, you just got to be ready to anticipate any pushback, especially in an environment where there's a lot of work at hand. All right, here's the other element, transformational, right? So it's got to be part of the evolving agile culture that we're within the organization. Is how do we embed TDD with what it is that we're doing today? That's really important. We have to build a culture of quality, right? So it's a little bit of a mindset shift in a sense, right? We're asking developers to do something quite different than what they did before. And it's around the evolution of agility, right? So it's about what happens next. Like I mentioned before when I started the story, we were at a point where the organization already had 52 agile teams. So what's next? They've been working like this for the past 3-4 years, right? So what is the next step of evolution? That's really the one piece there that we really needed to hone in when we came to the teams and communicated that this is just a natural step for your evolution as a team. The tools were really important. That's something that we needed to analyze, and we actually had a great breakthrough on that. But we needed to make sure that the tools are just not another added tool, not another swivel chair, something that would be seamless, right? Well integrated. And aside from that, we just had to go at this as an experiment, right? It had to be pioneership. So it's not only us venturing into this for the first time, but acknowledging that the teams are going through this for the first time as well. And they too are scientists. They're Doc Brown from the Back to the Future as well. Right? All right. And then valuable, right? So at the end of the day, it's about the value. Why are we doing this, right? We have to have some measurable success, that this is really going through the adoption, that we really are hitting on quality. We need to show evidence that there is an adoption, right? That it's just not somebody who took a course or whatever, and then, they did it once and that was good enough. We need to see evidence that there is an evolution, there is a growth pattern towards the future. And aside from that, we really want to hear about our people, right? Because it's, again, this is not top down. This is more of the influence. So if there's something there that's not working, we really want to hear from our people what it is that we need to do to improve upon that. Okay. All right, so this is the entire list of what it is that we thought about when we're thinking about, okay, how do we kind of go about it, right? And basically what we did was that we acknowledged that this was going to be an experiment. How are we going to do it? We had a discussion around that. First of all, we had to identify who the rollout team was. Who are going to be the folks that will be the credible folks that will be helping promote what TDD is? Who are going to be the trainers, right? As I mentioned before, we really didn't have any money to bring in an outside expert. Luckily, one of the coaches that we had during the time had some experience in working with TDD. And then later on, we had another coach join in the fun and really kind of brought in some additional experience to what it is that we were doing, right? So far, we haven't really charged anything associated to this particular program build. So for the proof of concept, all right, initially, we wanted to start out with a few teams. We wanted to explore what this program was going to be like. So we were thinking about maybe around 2 or 3 teams that we were going to start out with, and more so on Scrum teams, right? Because now this is where it's more cross-functional. There's a lot more opportunity for cross-collaboration. And then we also thought about, okay, well, we have to have a classroom training. That's the most important thing. So we're thinking about between 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. What is it going to be? We didn't want to disrupt the team, but we also felt that the information that was going to be provided was going to be critical for the success of that particular team itself. Essentially, we just had to really come down to, all right, let's look at the materials and let's see how much time we need to be able to go through the entire thing, right? And then aside from that, is one thing is the classroom setting. The other thing was the experiences that the team needs to go through, right? Is the realized value piece that I mentioned before, right? Is the hands-on training. And what that means is that now the team is actually using real life information for them to go and take it through the practice. That's the really the piece there that we felt was going to be critical. And for that, we needed to ensure that the stories were properly written and that the team was the right team to be able to go ahead and take on this particular practice for the first time. And then materials, again, about the self-serve model and building a playbook, we need to ensure that we started creating some materials, some in-house materials, a repository, a library, so that they can go ahead and search for information whenever they need it. Right? Now, we started thinking about the team. Who would be the initial sort of pioneers that would go into TDD, right? So some things are for certain, right? We had to look for a team that was looking for the next step in the evolution, a high maturity team. That was the most important thing, right? A team that had already, maybe low levels of anti-patterns, a team that was, very mature in the way they wrote user stories, because the acceptance criteria was critical for the conversation that we needed with the 3 amigos, all right? Somebody who basically, a team that was between projects. And typically what happens between projects is that there's a lot more of analysis and design time frame during that time. So there's no critical deliveries just yet because the work is truly just being defined. So we felt that there was just that window of opportunity there where their workload was going to be a little bit less than when all of a sudden we're hitting up against a delivery date. Okay. And then aside from that, like I mentioned before, a cross-functional team that needed to be the most important thing, making sure that there's a representation from the skill sets of a tester, developer, even a BA if possible, and PO as well. Scrum Master also, that's the most important thing. And a team that was coachable. A team that wasn't set on their ways, that they were willing to go experiment and grow and try new things. Okay. So this is kind of how we kind of laid out our experiment, right? All right. So in true agile fashion, we went ahead and we built up a backlog, right? And associating to some of the objectives that I talked about earlier. So in terms of vision, the recognition program really supported that. And this is how. So in having the teams understand what the vision is for the future, they needed to make sure that they were shifting the needle for what it is that they were doing, right? If we wanted these folks to be ambassadors of the future, we need to recognize them aside from the entire blueprint of the agile teams within the organization itself. So this is where the recognition program actually sprout. It wasn't even like just for the TDD program. This is something that we thought about for the organization as a whole to measure agility in a way. Now, some say that, oh, you're putting teams against each other and all that, but surprisingly, teams are not really competing against each other. They're really competing against themselves. What they want to do is they want to be able to perfect their art and they want to celebrate it. And that's where that recognition program sort of came in, right? And I mentioned before the credibility, so we had to identify who the cross-functional team is. Now, it had to be passionate crew. It had to be a group of people that basically would step away from their busy day to be able to dedicate to this, right? There wasn't any bump. There wasn't any management pushing, this on anybody. We had to select people that were credible and different skill sets, and that they wanted to contribute, that they wanted to be part of that vision that we talked about. All right. And then when I mentioned around the transformation itself, it's, selected teams, innovative, mature teams. When it talks to scalability, it was really, we needed to have the TDD playbook. That's ultimately one of the final products that we needed for this particular experiment. Now, when it came to adoptability, we already talked about, we're going to have to at least identify the user stories that we thought were going to be candidates for this particular exercise. All right. It had to be applicable to the work that was happening. So if we're selecting a team, we need to understand the type of work that they were doing. Maybe not all the teams qualify to go through this initial stage of TDD. So we need to look at the project. We needed to look at the time. We needed to look at all the different, elements and the profile of the team. So there was a lot of analysis done throughout, looking at all the 52 teams to identify who were going to be those 2 or 3 teams that we talked about initially. Right? And then valuable, right? So again, it's about value, realized value. And through that, we created surveys to get, a sentiment from the team members. We did retrospectives, interviews as well. And then what we talked about was potential metrics, because what we came to quickly realize is that quality is something that you measure over time. So it's not that you start TDD today and then by the end of the sprint, you're going to notice a significant difference. You're really going to notice the difference, from in towards the long future, right? When we start deploying a lot of into production, and you start noticing that, hey, there's definitely some heavy reduction in production defects. All right, so just to kind of explain a little bit around the workflow. All right, so as I mentioned, the top section over here, this is the Kanban rollout team. So these are the credible folks that I mentioned to you, and we worked in the Kanban fashion. And some of the inputs that we had there obviously was about the backlog that we talked about. We would have like regular touch bases just to kind of measure and talk about the things that we were doing. We would do working sessions and brainstorming sessions to understand what it is that we're going to be rolling out as a program. And then we would build it out in a Kanban board, right? And ultimately what we would do is that our outputs would be things that would go ahead and improve and add towards the program. Now here on the bottom section, this is where the POC Scrum teams were, the 2 to 3 that I mentioned before, right? And some of the inputs were there is that they would have their own backlog, but we need to identify what those stories are, right? We need to ensure that we have participation of the entire team, including product owner, Scrum Master. Everybody had to be part of this. And aside from that, what they would do is that, we need to ensure that, hey, they're able to demo evidence at the end of the sprints, right? That's ideally what it is that we're looking to do, right? And again, we talked about the outposts, we had the recognition, the journey into adoption. We really need to see that evidence, right? And aside from that, it's really one of the biggest wins there for the team is, and now they actually adopted a new skill set, right? All right, so without further ado, I'm going to show you a little bit of a glimpse in terms of what we ended up with, right? So here is kind of like the resulting product. Now, mind you, this is constantly evolving. And at least for this particular exercise, if I was going to show the entire material and then everything, we'll probably be here a couple hours, right? So what I try to do is I try to cram in as best as possible. Oh,
No, we cannot hear the music.
yeah, that was the thing. That was the audio thing there, Nelu. That was a tricky one. So anyways, the idea behind the inspiration of today's presentation was really around the work that we did for this particular program, right? So as you can see, this is the actual, like some of the slides that we use for the initial classroom setting session. And the idea was to really kind of bring in a more welcoming type message, something that they would allow the team to really feel the sense of purpose. And if you see with all the views and the materials and everything like that, we wanted to make sure that we separate ourselves from actual work, that this is something fun, right? This is not the added work of having to sit through a boring presentation. This is something that's going to be entertaining. And aside from that, we're going to learn, right? And just to kind of give you an idea of where we landed today with an agenda. As I mentioned before, we had a new coach that joined in the party, right? And he added some additional elements to the particular program. So we're no longer talking about TDD, right? We're now bringing into the conversation testing and test automation, pair programming, agile architecture, CI/CD, right? These are all now elements of the materials that we're having in the classroom setting. Now, here's one of the things that we wanted to ensure. There's sound, but don't worry about that. Here's another incentive that we considered. So as I mentioned, one of the coaches had come and he had really kind of built up this program, right? He added some additional topics to the particular material. Now, when it comes to the badging system, this is what we kind of came up with, right? This is the actual badge that the team, was granted after they went through the entire program. So here's the recognition incentive that ties into the actual vision of where it is that we want to head towards. And here's the entire sort of course. So the particular coach happens to be one of the, he's a C prime coach, and he's able to certify under Scrum Alliance, right? So the CSD is something that if any team goes through the program, if they wanted to go ahead and exercise, and wanting to go get certified, they can actually do so, right? So it's not only the launch of the actual program itself, but now we're allowing the team members to go and get certified officially if they wanted to. So here we, just kind of, I mashed up kind of like the topics and everything, but we talk about the tester and development topic. We talk about the test automation tools and frameworks that are currently happening within the organization. It's like the must-knows of the systems that we use today. We talk about the pair programming and why it is important as part of the development practices. The CI/CD and our integrations, right? There's a lot of automation things that are in play right now and have been worked on for quite a bit of time, right? So now we have our experts coming in and talking about all the tools that we have and the things that we have in terms of integration with our work management tools. And the agile architecture, which is key. Now, this is interesting because What happens there within an agile team that typically there's some technical leaders within the team itself, those that are more involved in the architectural discussions, right? In some organizations, that's done by design. So in this particular situation, what we found out to be a win is that for some of the folks that are not involved in some of these, architectural review sessions, they had the opportunity to hear from their, from their, not only their trainer, but their fellow teammates on some of the agile architectural practices that they do. So like I mentioned, what you're learning here is something that they're already incorporating, right? We're just bringing realization to the team itself so that they can go ahead and share that knowledge across their own team. Now, within each particular topic, this is where we gave the demo tips, right? So the idea behind this was that we wanted to give enough information so that when they go and do their hands-on training, they can come back with certain evidence. What we found to be very interesting is that teams really took this seriously, right? They really kind of, they were pushing the envelope on creativity and really gathering the information. Some of them actually had, Confluence pages full of information, right? And one of the biggest wins that I thought we actually achieved is that some were actually going and doing some tests. They were doing their own experiments. They were creating test cases and creating libraries for the rest of the people to benefit from. That's something that we did not anticipate. Now what's happening is that the moment that we're introducing TDD within the team itself, and we're kind of giving them the hat of being, scientists, right, to go into this as a, as an experiment, now they're really bringing innovation into play. They're adding to the community by doing this. So here's kind of some of the highlights of the program itself, but what I want to cover here is more on the step-by-step, right? So the way that we kind of go about and really bringing a team together was, let's have a conversation with a PO and a Scrum Master, and really as servant leaders, it's really important to ensure that we have their buy-in, right? That's really truly important. Aside from that, they're the ones that are really filtering the work down to the team itself. So we want to make sure that at least this is considered to be part of sprint goals for the team, right? So the team feels confident that they can go ahead and add those things as part of their sprint goals. Then what we do is that we would meet with the team and sort of kind of hype them up. We talk about basically all the benefits, all the things that, that they should expect when they go into this program and get them all excited. And then finally, what we would do is that we would go ahead and schedule the kickoff. And here's where the classroom setting will go ahead and start, right? So we will have the classroom setting, like I mentioned, is around 3 hours. And then what we will do is that we will go ahead and visit, be any of the trainers or coaches would visit the sprint planning session and be there to hear out which stories the team wants to commit and run through the TDD process. We're really there just listening in, waiting for questions to be raised in case they are needed. But we are looking for, to identify which stories are the ones that the teams are considering. We want to take a look at those things as they're going through their sprint. And then again, aside from that, is that they're going to go through their regular hands-on practice, as I mentioned before, take the entire sprint to really do the work. What we really encouraged the team to do was that, because not everybody can go and follow the TDD examples and the pair programming and all these other elements. So what the team did was that they went ahead and they split responsibilities amongst each other. And then they came back, and around collaboration time, they would demo to each other on the things, on the findings, on their experiences of what it is that they're putting together towards the demo. So that's the way that we ensured that knowledge was being shared across the team. Not only, come the demo day and have the team member that was working on it share it to the rest of the team for the very first time. What was happening throughout the sprint is that they would come back together and share the progress that they were doing towards the TDD model. And then around mid-sprint, we would kind of join in trainers and the coaches and see if there's any questions or anything like that, give guidance on what it is that we're looking for as part of the demo. Now, with the demo, on demo day, this wasn't really like this strict assessment or anything like that. It was really more around a discussion. What the trainers and the coaches wanted to do was just really see the evidence, right? We wanted to see that they actually went and did it and what their experiences were. Now, it's not only is not only a benefit to them when they go ahead and they pass the demo, but it's also a benefit to the trainers and the coach, the rollout team, because the feedback that they give will allow us to know if we're hitting the mark, if we're moving towards the right direction, if the vision is really validated, like, hey, is this vision really possible, right? So demo day is definitely important, not only for the team, for them to, finally get their kind of certification, but also for the rollout team to understand how much value we're really adding to this whole program. And then aside from that, we definitely go and do a retro, and it's around improvement and building up on the backlog later on. All right, so going back to this guy who looked really, really confused. Here are some of the accomplishments so far. So I mentioned a TDD playbook. All right, we had a solid CSD program. So it wasn't even a TDD program, it was a CSD program. We had a way to certify the folks. We created a badging program that not only for TDD, but for the organization itself. We had training materials, videos. We had now a group of influencers. We're up to 6 teams today, and we continue to build. And the idea is that we're giving ourselves some goals year after year until we get the entire population of agile teams within the organization. And then again, like I mentioned, we have the beginnings of a TDD library. Now, this is basically knowledge sharing at its best. The teams that are going through this experience, what they're doing is that they're adding to a library and allow others to really benefit from their experience as well. Okay. So this is kind of like how I look today, right? So I don't look like the other guy anymore. Right? All right, so here are some of the wins. All right, so it's less invasive, is more accepting. That's really true. The power of recognition, don't underestimate that. Realize value through experiences, that's the most important thing. The breaking of silos, the unification of teams, that's definitely a plus. Experiment at scale, like I mentioned, teams are really looking at it from a scientific standpoint. Evolving agility, improved quality, which is typically, that's the main use case of TDD, right? A streamlined workflow, right, is working better within each other, within the team. Better design of the code, a spreading of understanding and knowledge across the team. And now you got a bunch of motivated individuals, and they're really bringing the wow factor into everything that they're doing. So, all right, so I leave you with this, right? In conclusion, never forget the why. That's really important. It's really easy to try to convince somebody, but if you really can't really tap into the why and what it means to them, then you're probably just wasting your wind, right? So really never forget the why. It's easy to inspire others when you're inspired as well. So whatever you do, really look at it from that perspective. You want to be able to kind of walk in with inspiration, and the rest of the people are going to really receive that as well. And motivation comes from a sense of purpose, right? So what is the purpose? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And just be motivated and push forward. All right. So that is my TDD story. Really appreciate it.
Wow.
Any questions?
No, I think we have a lot of questions. I have
Oh,
two,
sorry.
but let's go ahead and see if anybody else has questions, please. My first question is, how difficult was it to get buy-in from the technical leaders in getting permission to find the first team that would volunteer to do this, being that everybody's always so busy and we're delivering at 100%, miles per hour. How difficult was that, and what was the approach in the conversation there?
Well, I think that's where the power recognition really came through, right? Again, it's working in an agile team, both the PO, the Scrum Master, the technical lead. You really build this brotherhood, right? Ultimately. So when you come with the reasons of the why and purpose and what it is that it means to a team to grow within their agile maturity, I think in essence, they knew that this was coming from a good place, right? And it's really around, identifying to the vision. And that's really what the conversation was about, right? It's really what, if they really align to the vision and what it is that we're looking to accomplish. And it really became an easy sell after that. Now, you're right. When it comes to the delivery of things, those are really top to mind, right? Because they're thinking about, hey, if I don't deliver on time, they're going to come down on me and everything like that. But at the same time, that brotherhood is the one that really kind of comes to the forefront, because ultimately you want the best for your family, the best for your brotherhood. And, this was a way to do it, bringing in this piece into their agile maturity journey.
My second question is, you said you have 6 teams now, right? Have you been able to track any improvements at the individual team metrics since you started the practice? Did you have a baseline, and is there an improvement in the individual team metrics or in any of the teams?
So that's where it became a little bit of a challenge, right? We're looking to really capture quality metrics, right? And the only way to do that was really to see if there was good reporting around bugs, introduction of bugs, and things of that nature. Now, within the development environment, there may be some ways there that we're looking to see if there was some improvement on bugs, but not all the data was able to be pulled, at least in a way that we can go ahead and compare over time. Now, the idea is that, since where we work at, everybody integrates into the same sort of pipeline, and then they go and roll out into production, right? So once we go into this integrated sort of environment, that's where we hope to see if there's any difference in bug introductions, right? Because ultimately the majority of our testing is really done at that piece. So if we come into the integration with less, with better quality, so the idea is that the integration is going to go a lot smoother. So those are the measurements that we're looking and including as part of our backlog.
All right, awesome. I think there's some questions on the chat. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Adolfo, I have a comment question. So comment is a great presentations, and my apology, I was not able to join these meetings, but certainly I'm going to join now because I enjoyed every bit of it. Okay, because it's just coming like, hey, these experiences and how. Now other question is, so this POC is done for Verizon, is that correct? Team, or are you doing something else somewhere else?
Because no, this is you, Rajiv. This is us.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
it is. It is.
Okay, now I have a follow-up question now. See, if you look at total Verizon launch, if you look at state of multi-line launch, so I had more than 1,000 bugs, okay, in integration environment, right? Now, my question is, like right now, if you look at the code repository of Track for Verizon, so we have million lines of code in SOA, okay? There was one thought, hey, we are going to we convert everything in microservices, okay? So we could do a piece of it, but rest of it still is in SOA. Now, if you do a project, right? So most of the times you are basically updating the existing line of code, right? You're not writing the new line of code also. And also you are just working on the existing test cases, right? Suppose you go to testing team, they say, hey, we have 1,500 test cases, right? So there's no test cases written, right? So basically, so that's why I have slightly disconnect from TDD, because here we are starting something from scratch, right?
Yeah.
We are allowing developers and testers to coordinate and write in new test cases and tests. So how, okay, in short, I'm saying, how do you see this future for Verizon TrackFlow, right? Because where we have so much business pressure coming, you do initiative, next initiative, when do you get the time to take it, in such a way that, hey, it's a complete transformation, right? See, agile transformation was one milestone, right? I was part of that along with you, right? So we transfer now. Now coming to a TDD, which is really going to help us, because you will really see that, hey, there is drastic drop down in the bugs on production, okay? I mean, maybe you may not need an incident management team, right? If you're doing such a quality software, so you may not look for any incident. So I'm just looking for the future. What is the plan? What is the roadmap you have? Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that really aligns to the vision. So I'll kind of mention a little bit, obviously, coming from the same organization. So there's a lot of product modeling discussions, things that are, we're looking into the future to improve upon that. TDD just happens to be an element associated to it. Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that TDD does introduce is that it introduces a mindset, right? It's the way that developers look at a code differently, right? So we do have all this, sort of code that we already, created over time, right? And even then, and you know this, Rajiv, right? It's evolved over time because as people come and go, they come bring their own flavor to the mix, right? Which
Yes.
makes it a lot more difficult. But I'll quote you on saying something that one of the team members said when this sort of came up, right? We were talking about in terms of test coverage that ultimately we want to hit around 85% test coverage when it comes to the TDD piece, right? And one of the discussions around that, it was that they, some of this stuff is already existing. Like we're not really developing any new code. We're just, there's minimal coding that we have to do, right? And one of the things that was mentioned was that what TDD allows you to do is really kind of notice some of the things that are some of the dysfunctions that are happening within them, right? So the idea is that it's really around the mindset shift, right? That even though we don't have a lot of time to really convert everything that we need to, right? What we can do is that we can try to improve it little by little, right? So if we're looking at the future and what it is that we're looking to do, is that we identify and we understand really what doesn't work well, and we got to think about, hey, how are we going to be transitioning into the future that we need to? And that's really the one piece there that I think this program is going to be introducing, right? Is because now we're really kind of allowing the developers and everybody within the team to look at things a lot different, right? It's not really just to patch up and continue on. Now we're looking at it from the perspective of, hey, let's have a discussion around the dysfunctions and see how we can improve upon that. So those were some of the conversations that we're having that, definitely is a little bit difficult because the new code, like you said, it's limited, right? There's a lot of old code that we have to still deal with. But the idea is that, we got to think about really, improving, refactoring those things as we start moving forward, ideally.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I had a question. So, hi. Yeah, so the 16 that are doing TDD now, are they like on-site or off-site or their combination? Like, what is the
the organization, there's a blend, right? There's a mix of offshore and on-site. So I'm wondering if you're thinking about more of are we thinking about like the pair programming activities or just like the time?
I was just thinking about the buy-in, right? Like it's not only just from the management or product owner, like you need a buy-in from a developer as well. So,
yeah.
So if the developer is offsite, like how, is it equally challenging to have a buy-in from an offsite developer versus an on-site?
No, not really. No, I wouldn't say that. If anything,
right? They're all remote, Adolfo. Technically, they're remote.
Yeah, they're pretty much all remote because everybody's working from home in a sense, right?
Okay.
But I would say that quite honestly, the most challenge that I probably received was from the more senior developers, right? The ones that are probably looking more at, are being pulled into multiple things and they're kind of set on their ways and skill, right? Those were the ones that I felt were a little bit more of a challenge than anything else. But if they were offshore or offsite, it wasn't really a challenge itself. In essence, I think for the most part, when it came to the recognition, the team kind of was united at that. They really wanted to stand out from the rest, right? And if there was any difficulty coming from any one developer, if anything, they didn't want to hold up the ability for the rest of the folks to really build up on the maturity itself, right? So they kind of, in a way, because they do care about their team, they sort of joined in to ensure that, hey, we go through this.
Got it.
We got Joanne and Bob. Joanne?
Yes, thank you, Adolfo. This was a great presentation. And I'm kind of face similar stuff at work. So I have a question. The pair programming, how would I phrase this question? How do I buy in from the dev lead to make the decision? Because I noticed in one of my team, the story is not getting completed on time because when I look at each person velocity, one person are stronger than the other, but the dev lead don't believe in that. Well, he don't believe in that. And also he want to make the voice for the whole team. If the team, they say, yeah, this is how the story should break down, he want to my company is fully agile, but we
Yeah.
brought up this dev lead from the outside, and he has a different mindset, and I kind of feel this tension between the team where he interrupt the team doing demo and the pair programming. He doesn't agree with that. So how do I come with him? Because the product owner is seeing that, not liking his input, the way he's doing things. So how do we make a decision, get him to see that he's not the team manager, you're just a dev lead with more experience and agile. We make decision as a team because that's how the company is built.
Yeah, that's a bit of the team culture challenge, right? I mean, if anything, I think the trick is going to be really changing the mindset of that individual itself, right? Going from a more of a command and control and having them embrace more of the servant leadership role, right? Pair programming is frustrating in nature. A lot of developers really get frustrated because you got two people kind of paired up, and then maybe in the case that one's a navigator, the other one's a conductor. Like it comes to a point where they get a little bit frustrated in essence. Now, what I saw from the demos that I've seen with this whole TDD approach is that one of the more successful pair programmings had been as a new team member has joined the team, right? So they wanted to bring him up to speed, and that was the best way to do it. The other element itself is that the more junior wanted to really, push their limit a little bit more and take on more responsibility. So from the servant leadership of the tech lead, who kind of the more senior person, they were kind of taking them under their wing in that case, right? That was the other success piece, right? So I think most importantly is really changing the dynamics of how that person interacts with the team itself, right? And really trying to influence a different mindset with them. I would say that if it shows up on a retro, that's probably a great opportunity to have a conversation with that tech lead, right? And maybe talk about the missed opportunities, right? Having somebody who's probably as knowledgeable and as experienced as them, perhaps that they could be more influential in different ways, right? And really, because a lot of times when one person speaks and sort of takes on the room, it just doesn't allow the rest of the folks to really learn and grow, right? So that means that person becomes the bottleneck in many decision-making activities that the team does, right? So maybe their workload is heavy because they're making all the decisions for the team because they're speaking for the team. If the guy doesn't show up that day at work because he's sick or whatever, is the team able to function without him, right? So these are probably the conversations that you could have with this person, is that ultimately in the long run, probably making his job a lot easier, right? If he's able to empower the rest of the team.
Thank you. Yes.
Your question, Bob?
Yeah. How have your user stories changed since?
Good question, Bob. That's a great question.
All right. Let me ask a facetious question to start. How do you hire any reputable, high-performing developers if you're not doing most TDD? I mean, we've been doing it for 10 years, and I couldn't hire someone. If we didn't do TDD, I could not get a reputable developer. Why wouldn't? Anyway, so let's start with the user story. I'm just surprised that you have 46 teams that are not doing it, and you can hire developers that are up to date on how to develop code.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's really the thing I'm faced against, right? There wasn't a lot of experience within the ecosystem, and I question why, right? This practice has been around for quite a bit of time, right?
There's experience, TDD experience all over. It's been out for 12 years. We've been doing it for 12 years. Yeah. So I'm flabbergasted.
No, really surprised. No, that is a surprising thing. Now, it doesn't mean that they haven't heard of it, but are they taking it to practice every day? It felt like it wasn't. I wouldn't say it's a new topic for a lot of people, and a lot of people were interested and open to doing it. But like I mentioned, it was really more of a mindset change for them, surprisingly, right? Something that's been around for quite a bit of time. I would expect a lot more people to really, have done it, at least, based on the conversations.
If they've done it right, they wouldn't go back. So they might have had it bad. So anyway, let's get back to the user story. How have you used it?
So that was so user stories actually improved. So interesting. The first team that we identified, and we talked about the criteria, right? We wanted to be a, mature team, somebody who had a lot of experiences between projects and that sort of thing. That team itself, they were kind of between product owners, right? And a lot of times what we noticed is that the stories were not well written. A lot of the acceptance criteria was quite limited, wasn't really clear. Even the user stories, the way that they were written, were just not clear at all, right? And some of them were more technical in nature and those sort of things, right? So we had a lot of challenges there for the first team, right? So good thing is that when the new project was coming in, then again, we reinforced with like user story writing, a workshop and really started kind of bringing in that lesson to the new product owner that was coming in and stepping in, right? And right there, basically they started adopting a new practice. But since we were rolling out TDD, we just felt that that was just a lot more overhead to deal with. We needed to move a lot faster, right? So we started noticing that, at least the conversation around proper user story writing and the acceptance criteria really nailed the mark when we started building up that more robust CST classroom training, right? And then now, for a lot of these teams, when you go into their user story, now they're really practicing Gherkin, right? They're really going through scenario-based acceptance criteria. You start noticing now that they're really, since they are forced to really have a true conversation around it, they're really kind of trying to uphold the best practices when it comes to user story writing. So that was actually one of the wins. I should have probably just added that to the particular list itself, is that we did notice an upkeep on the user story writing, which is definitely a good thing.
So do you include the actual tests in the user story itself as part of the acceptance criteria?
Well, what we do is that we have Jira and it's integrated with X-Ray, right? So all the test cases are included within the story itself. So it goes with the test plan, the test cases, everything's integrated within the particular story itself. The good thing too is that now that the product owner, they're a lot more involved in the conversation, and now we have the tool that integrated with Jira. It allows a conversation around what the test plan is and how it measures against the acceptance criteria. Ideally, the acceptance criteria is the one that translates into the test cases, right? So that definitely is happening now, especially since we introduced a new test management tool that's integrated with the work management tool in Jira, right? So everything is sort of lined up within that. And then if you pile up all the, what do you call it, the Bitbucket and all the pipeline integrations that are currently in there, it's really starting to look very beautiful, at least from an integrated standpoint. Looking really, really good.
Do you include quality control in the test user story development? You have all that. You have quality control is about writing tests. Why would you not include them in the user story development?
Oh yeah, they're in there. They're in there. That's what X-Ray does. They're all the test cases.
I didn't see that in your presentation. That's just a little.
Oh yeah, like I mentioned, it's all. I integrated the purpose of this presentation, but within the training itself, we do talk about the tools, X-Ray, and how it's integrated with Jira, and basically making sure that it's all lined up within the story itself. But yeah, that's part of it.